experiential pedagogy. We are all aware that curriculum, assessment, and pedagogy form the key areas of any effective classroom transaction, measuring learning, nurturing creativity, and enhancing student achievement. Though we've been discussing this for decades, yet there seems to be an urgency always to address these issues, seeing the dichotomy of gaps in learning levels on the one hand and securing 100 marks on the other. But none other than Balaji could be better in discussing and critically analyzing these issues and concerns. Mr. Balasubramaniam has had a diverse experience and expertise in myriad disciplines in his educational journey, which is indeed fascinating and worth mentioning. Post-graduation in chemistry, post-graduation in Hindi, and post-graduation in education. Further, he obtained a diploma in German from the University of Madras, a certificate in project technology from Trent College of Education, Nottingham, UK, and a certificate in computer education from Leeds University, UK. He is a certified master trainer for skills development from Glasgow, UK. Starting his career as a postgraduate teacher in chemistry in a public school, he took over as principal of a Hindu senior secondary school, Chennai. He joined the CBSE as a joint secretary in 1984 and has worked in several capacities in academics, examination, confidential and administrative branches of CBSE. Elevated to the post of Director Academics, he held the additional charge of the Chief Vigilance Officer of the board. Presently, he has his own consultancy services under the banner of Educational Systems and Innovations. Known so well for his innovation in curriculum development and interactive pedagogy, he has been instrumental to the introduction of several innovations in curriculum in CBSE, which include a variety. Communicative approach to language teaching, information technology, biotechnology, entrepreneurship, fashion studies, disaster management, life skills education, alternatives to homework, among many others. He's a strong advocate of stress-free education and has initiated several steps in this direction. He has fashioned himself as a premier teacher trainer and in ushering change management in schools. He's conducted nearly 2,000 training programs for teachers at both in India and abroad after his retirement, covering around 50,000 teachers. So much to learn from you, Balaji. And needless to add that every time we hear him, we learn something new always. His interests are equally varied. They include philosophy, psychology, poetry, and literature. He has widely traveled in many countries and has participated in several national and international conferences and presented papers on a wide variety of academic interests. And he's held several prestigious posts in his career, and at present, he is the consultant of Madhuban Publishing Company, Delhi, the chief editor, the Progressive School magazine, the chairperson, board of advisor, the International Council for School Leadership, Delhi, and the advisor of the Teacher Inn and the Grey Caps, Bangalore. He's authored several books for schools in science and information technology. He's authored several books for teachers, academicians, and educational administrators. He's also published several short stories, poems, and articles in Tamil magazines. Balaji, among the many publications that I was reading about, what both education and poetry, what excited my curiosity and interest was the Apologies to an Existence. Interesting. I think next time a seminar, webinar, workshop, we can organize from you on this topic. Very interesting. Balaji has been the recipient of the Vocational Educational Excellence Award, Rotary Club Chennai, the Sabha Ratna in Education, the Centenary Trust Chennai, and the Lifetime Excellence Award, Wim Hans Delhi. Balaji, we are so proud and indeed honored to have you amidst us this morning.
Thank you.
I'm sure this will be another great pleasure and a delight, always as you are with your teachers and educators. I also got a very warm welcome to all the participants. who've joined us for this amazing morning of great learning. Also welcome our principal, Mrs. Manju Sethi, and Mrs. Rashmi Chari, who is the educational and training consultant of our center, which we are going to, the issues are being talked about today, the Center for Curriculum Assessment and Pedagogy. A warm welcome to everybody. And I hand over now to Mrs. Rashmi Chari to conduct and facilitate today's interactions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rashmi Chari, and I'm in conversation today with veteran educationist Dr. G. Balasubramanian. Namaskar, sir. Thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. You are a role model for all educators and someone we constantly look up to for inspiration. Indra Ungal Vargai Angal Gauravam. It's such an honor to have you amongst us today.
Well, I think I recall my last visit to Bluebell School on a program called Life Skills, where all the teachers joined me in singing the song Zindagi Ek Safar Hai Suhana, right? And that's a kind of good relation I have with Bluebells.
That's so wonderful, sir. It's been almost 4 months since NEP 2020 was released by Honorable Minister Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank to mixed reactions from all quarters. While no one has contested the usefulness and timeliness of school reforms, there has been a bit of skepticism regarding implementation of these extremely progressive and ambitious provisions. Sir, our Center for Curriculum and Pedagogy and Assessment is actively working to facilitate the implementation of NEP in schools, private as well as government, through courses, workshops, and webinars such as these. So the theme of our discussion today is pedagogical reforms, and with your help, we wish to make our viewers understand the why and how of the changes that need to be urgently brought in at every level and every aspect of schooling. In the long list of reforms that NEP has proposed, the first issue we would like to discuss with you is pedagogical restructuring. The new structure 3 plus 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 has been created by grouping classes according to the age group of children. So children from ages 3 to 8 studying in pre-primary, class 1 and 2, and together they make foundational level, followed by age group 9 to 11 years studying in classes 3 to 5 at preparatory level, ages 12 to 14 studying in classes 6 to 8 make middle level, and 15 to 18 age group studying in classes 9th to 12th make the high school. So please tell us how the new structure of schooling would be an improvement over the previous one. What are the current issues and challenges that this restructuring hopes to address? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rashmi. It's a very interesting topic. As a matter of fact, in the last couple of months, education sector has been impacted by two major challenges. One is that of the COVID. The other is the national policy, because people thought that the policy might come a little later, but then one day it just was on the table. But I think so far as the national policy is concerned, it's possibly a bit late too, to my concern. You know why? Because in so far as the industry is concerned, most countries, including India, had gone to a fourth generation. We used to call industry 4.0, whereas when it comes to education, we were only in education 2.0. So there was a huge gap between the industry and the education sector, and the need for bridging the skills, knowledge, and bringing some kind of appropriacy for the education to be relevant to industry was very important. So therefore, I think this the national education policy has taken cognizance of that, and then it has been a great disruptor to me to the thought architecture of education. If you really want to understand the policy and also the structure, probably you will have to see this policy in the continuum of the educational thought process that has been in this country since independence, which is very important for teachers to know. The first attempt ever came in the year 1952 when A.L. Mudaliar Commission was constituted, and Mudaliar Commission was responsible for looking at the school, secondary education. But the focus at that time was that the post-independent area, we were absolutely native to the educational reform, and that focused largely on the basic education policy of Mahatma Gandhi, and therefore the focus was to facilitate schooling and learning to the children across the country and improving the the enrollment ratio across the country. So that was not adequately addressing to the quality of education or the needs of education at this point of time. But then the major, challenge came in the year 1966 when the Kothari Commission report came to India, where they said the first sentence itself was mind-boggling, that the destiny of a nation is being written in her classrooms. And I think that defined what the purpose was. But at that time, India had slowly developed, and we were having an industrial climate, and we need a large number of people to be recruited to the industry in terms of skilled manpower, semi-skilled manpower. So the focus of the Kothari Commission report was to generate human resources to meet the developing challenges of the country, and therefore the 10+2 scheme was being introduced, where everybody will get a core education. Subsequently, they could be diversified to vocational education. But very interesting aspect of it was the commission expected nearly about 75 to 80% of the population to go to the vocational education, and 20% going to the academic education, higher education, because even in countries like US, the people who are going to the universities are only 30 to 35%, and therefore they thought that you need a large number of people to go to that education. But what happened was that the message that went out from the policy was that the vocational education is subservient to academic education, and therefore people who are intellectually vibrant will go to the school, and nobody would like to lose their self-esteem by saying that I am lower than anybody else. And therefore, I think even rickshaw puller, cobbler, everybody, they had the right to do so, and they wanted their children to go to the school education and the college education. And then as a consequence, what happened? We increased a large number of colleges without addressing to the basic needs of quality at that point of time. That was 1966-68. And then we came to 1986, where the first policy of education, new education policy, had come. And if you just read that, Rajiv Gandhi was a prime minister at the time, and we had Mr. Rao, Narasimha Rao was HRM at that time. And just look at the background. That was a year ahead of that. We had Her Excellency, the Queen of England, who had come to India, and she had donated about 250 BBC computers on that. And there was absolutely about going to technology world. And therefore, this policy focused 1986 on ICT, integration of technology into the education, and therefore everything including everything quality, everything was addressed in that context over there. Well, we went through the process whether really we integrated technology is a matter of debate. We hosted technology, but we did not integrate technology, right? That was the thing. And then when we came to the next important issue was 2005, when we came with the National Curricular Framework. And that at that time, if you look, we had come with the UNESCO's document of Delors report, which thought that the whole education across the world should move towards globalization, because we are becoming a global village, and every country should address to the concept of defining the global education. So that was the focus. But now coming to 2020, you see the thought architecture, the dynamics of the countries have changed, because they found that in the process of the globalization, the dominant countries had a greater market and others, and everybody's ability to produce and be participant of the global process was inadequate. Therefore, the focus of education in most countries today is turning over to the native domains, and no wonder this policy also talked about the India-centric education, which was absolutely in context with what the whole world was thinking about, number one. Then the structure, when you come to, we had at that time 10+2, which was basically, as I said, was diversifying education. Now, why we have this particular policy? If you go very deep into the structure, you'll find this policy is absolutely in consonance with, in synergy with the growth dynamics of the brain of the learners at this point of time. So I look at this whole policy, the 5 years, when you look at 5 years, people said, are we increasing the number of years? No, we are not. Actually, for the LKG, pre-KG, UKG is being put across that. We are only formalizing, putting the system in order and there. And very interestingly, one of the things which is not being surfaced, discussed in these policies is that the first time in this country, we have addressed about 0 to 3 years. I think that's a very, very important thing, because the learning right from the prenatal stage to what we call learning to learn at the post-18 age is a continuous process. So I find that this policy is completely, following the learning curve of the children, right? And therefore, if you look at the 5 level, right, where the children have more of, curiosity, I would say psychomotor curiosity, where more when you talk about the brain development, they say that at the primary level, the prefrontal lobe is developing slower as compared to amygdala. So children are more emotional at this point of time. So emotional management of the children is very important. So the playway method or all other methods are being done. And then you have the third stage, where the curiosity is very high between classes 3 to 5. And then when you look at 6 to 8, you find the experiential domain, that's a time when the self-esteem of the people develops over there. And therefore, the kind of pedagogy we have is addressing to that. And then you have the 9 to 12 as a core learning, where the focus is on multi-level entry and multi-level multi-exit. You have an interdisciplinary learning happening around. So if you generally look at the kind of the structuring, for people, it looks like a number game. But for people who understand psychology, who understand neurocognitive impacts of learning process, I think this is absolutely in order. That's what I think about it.
Sir, thank you so much for actually taking us through these 70 years and making us understand that when we have reached this stage, this is what our nation and our children really require. Thank you so much. So this brings me to the next question, which is about pedagogy, which you initiated. So I would like you to tell us in detail that the approaches like playway approach, inquiry-based learning, hands-on learning, experiential pedagogy, competency-based learning, project-based learning, how the schools are going to get into it, what do they have to do to give up the conventional methods of lesson planning and now shift to design thinking maybe? And what will teachers be doing differently in terms of planning and delivering their lessons? And so finally, what outcome, what changes will we see in the learner behavior?
Yeah, see, I think we are, for very technical reasons, we are playing with so many words in education. And naturally, all these things have been happening in one way or the other in our country. We are only giving a form, a name, and a shape to all that what was happening around at this point of time. So, first, basically, when you look at the word pedagogy, right, we need to understand what does the word really mean. I've been talking in some of the forums. The root of this word is from a Roman word, right, where in the Roman culture, the privilege of learning was only given to the rich people, right? And the wards of these rich people were taken to the house of masters, and they employed a slave who will escort the child from the house to the master, and that slave was known as a Gog. And he used to handhold the child, walk along with the child, familiarize the child to all that's happening around, and then stay put with the master, and then bring them back. Because he walked along, the word peda referred to the leg. Pedagogue was one who walked along with the child, handheld the child, and therefore, facilitated learning. And that's a word, way the word has come. So to me, a pedagogue is only a person who handholds a child. Right? There is a beautiful saying which says, a teacher is one who holds a hand, opens a mind, and touches a heart. Right? And I think these three important things what's happening. Pedagogy is all about that. Pedagogy is not teaching a textbook. Pedagogy is not what you call, running what's the so-called curriculum. A good teacher is one who is, I say curriculum, a textbook is like a runway for an aircraft to take off, and a good teacher runs it with the way, and the pilot should take it above the flight. He can't say, I'm not able to see, I have a runway beyond. And that's exactly what the classroom is all about. And therefore, to me, we need to go beyond the normal understanding of the term pedagogy and teaching. That's one reason when you talk about Aurobindo, who used to say, the first true principle of teaching is that nothing can be taught. And today, neurocognitive psychologists very clearly say that the brain has no competence of being taught. In other words, it is not meant for teaching, it's meant for learning. Brain wants challenges. In other words, learning is nothing but a neural network. For example, 15 minutes before when you started this program, the neural network of all those present here was different. Now, 15 minutes later, now the neural network is different, because in this time you have learned something, right? Whether this learning happened because I spoke, because they taught, whether because there was an experience, there was because of visual. It's very difficult to say how the learning happens. Learning is a very personalized process. If you go to see how the brain operates, a brain receives about 30,000 visual cues in a matter of 1 hour. And the greatest challenge of the brain is the ability to synergize all the kinds of input, sensory inputs that you get, visual, auditory, and other things, and to make a meaning out of the word, Otherwise, a sensory input has no meaning. The brain tells you what it is, and probably what the brain tells may not be true, right? It is a perception which has happened in the brain. You understand? So the role of a teacher, right from KG to class 12, is to facilitate learning. And therefore, the learning, is a constructivist process. And that's exactly when we came to the constructivism of that. Now, earlier we said that every child constructs his own learning, which is absolutely true. But what happened was we moved from individual constructivism to social constructivism, right? When the social constructivism today, that's exactly what's happening through Wikipedia, through social thing. We are all, social construction of knowledge. In other words, a teacher has become a co-constructor of knowledge today. He doesn't have what you call the authority of knowledge. He participates in the knowledge construction. Co-construction of knowledge takes place over there. But how does it happen? Whether it happens through a play, whether you do, sometimes when you are bored, you want to play a game. Sometimes you want to read a thriller. Some time you want to take to Tagore. So that's what the experience is all about. Depending on my mood, depending on my emotional, depending on my attitude and aptitude, everything, I start learning the way. So to me, I always say a good teacher is like a good chef who prepares a buffet for the people to have a meal. In a hotel, if you go, you have got 130 items. If you eat all the 130, you will go sick. But you choose 5. Similarly, a teacher creates a variety of learning experiences in the classroom and leaves it to the children to pick up what kind of experience he finds good enough, happy enough, and to learn that way in that. In that process, we have what has happened was we went through a lot of rote learning, right? And we did not understand what learning was because we were running through the textual materials. As a matter of fact, when you go to the Gurukula system, you will find that Gurukula system was a fantastic model of blended learning, right? Because the Guru, what he said was, he let the children to go to the forest to collect fruits, to collect vegetables, to cut the wood. So the students, when they went, they understood the ecosystem, they understood the seasons, they understood the weather combinations. The children went to the villages to collect food. They had a social and learning. So learning was absolutely opened up. Now, even our people who never went to school, for example, you take a farmer. Right? A farmer, he knows, what should be the kind of soil, right? What should be the seed that should be put across at a time? How do you till, and how do you monitor the growth? How do you control the pesticide? How, they had a blended learning. And what we did was we killed everything in order to bring the prominence to your textbook. That's why Ken Robinson, in the famous TED lecture, says school skill creativity, right? And in a very interesting experiment, which was by Dr. Anil Gupta, it was found that the students in the age group of 13 to 18 who got the President's Award for Innovation, 70% of them are school dropouts, right? So that really said, people are, Winston Churchill said, I am willing to learn, but I refuse to be taught, right? And that's exactly what's happening today. That's a very good sign. With technology intervention, in my days, in your days, possibly when we went to school, 80% of learning was formal learning in the school, 20% was from the family and other things there. Today, 80% learning is outside and 20% inside. So we have to synergize. That's a challenge that teachers will get. Thanks to technology, we have now got into several modes like, flipped classroom, blended classroom, you got a heuristic classroom and all that. But again, the unfortunate part is people don't understand what they are. Now, in most schools, I'm sorry, I'm not making any comment about any that, but what I have seen, they think a digital delivery is where a teacher is present for 95% of the time on screen. Sorry, that is not true. A good flipped classroom or blended classroom is where a teacher doesn't show the face more than 30% of the time. The rest of the time is used for resources, right, and interactions and others, So you have to bring an asymmetric pattern in the classroom. And again, when I discussed with teachers over there, I asked, what's a flipped classroom? Somebody told me, सर जो स्कूल में होता है वो घर में होता है, अभी घर में पढ़ते हैं और घर में होमवर्क तो करते हैं, वो स्कूल में आके करते हैं. I said, sorry, that's not a flipped classroom at all, right? Because content preparation for a flipped classroom is entirely different. It's not a cut and paste of your textbook. It's not a cut and paste of your e-materials, right? Where the teacher has to deliver knowledge capsules, which are thought-provoking, which are analytical, so that when the child comes back to the class, 5 elements happen: reflection, analysis, construction, research, and then the creativity. These are the 5 outcomes of when there is a. But the difference between a flipped classroom and a blended classroom is, for a blended classroom, you have at least 20 to 25 different types of resources, right? For a flipped classroom, you use a limited one. All right. In a blended classroom, it is something like anytime, anywhere learning. I think that's the future. I very often say that the time has come that Amazonization of education is going to happen, right? Just like what to buy from Amazon. When a student asks me a question, right? Why can't I go to one school for physics, one school for chemistry, and one school for biology? I said, why not? That could be the future. So what I'm trying to say is that, so in this process, the role of teachers has changed, right? So you are standardize the format of your learning, lesson plan may not be as valid for that, because at that time when Bloom's taxonomy came, it was a unilayer learning, right? And rather even sometimes bilayer, not more than that. Today, we have a multi-layer learning. We have got an integrated learning. We have got interdisciplinary learning. We have got a multidisciplinary learning. We have got transdisciplinary learning. All are different. So when you create a lesson plan, right? Then every lesson plan has got to be contextual. There was a time when I was a teacher, a model of the lesson plan was given, and I would use to copy it for all the lessons. Sorry, it's not going to happen. The way you teach physics will be different, or the heat will be different from light. The way you teach light will be different from magnetism. So you got to conceptualize every lesson, every classroom, right? Even for the same class of 9th or 10th, you got 2 sections. The way you operate your pedagogy for one class may not. 80% may be common, but 20% depending upon the nature of learners and others have to be done. So a teacher has to be more imaginative, more what do you call that? I tell you, it will take 2 years for schools to adopt to digital technology, and that's a time schools of your kind has to work a lot in preparing the concept, what do you call the design thinking. I don't want to use the term design thinking because people get scared out of that. That's only an old process. But then it is what do you call very interesting. Teachers have to do a 2-year work in order to design what would be the best way of delivering a flipped classroom and the blended classroom. Last but not the least, even if they prepare something, remember one thing: knowledge and skills are changing every year. As a matter of every 6 months. So the lesson plan you prepare for this year is not going to be relevant for the next year. Probably you will have, so your teacher becomes a co-learner, your teacher becomes a self-learner, right? So don't expect NCERT, CBSE or your own departments of curriculum to come and train you, right? I think unless a teacher becomes a self-learner in terms of knowledge and skills, you don't need a management, you don't need a principal to judge you. Your children and parents are good enough. They are going to be the auditors of the future, right? So, I mean, we are opening up learning today, right? The four walls of the classroom is being opened. So what is the right pedagogy is incorrect to say that. It is contextual. It varies from classroom to classroom. The teacher has to be, using intuition and intelligence to design the lesson plan.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. And this is such a tall order for the teachers. They have to start reading, they have to empower themselves, they have to build up their own competencies in order to meet the learner, a varied and a very enlightened learner. With the internet at their disposal, the children know most of the things. The teachers just have to be facilitators of learning. Thank you so much, sir, for containing a wealth of knowledge in one answer. Now, this brings me to my next question, which is again about skills and knowledge and developing skills and knowledge in the learners. So pedagogical reforms appear to be connected to NEP's overarching vision of going beyond the content and knowledge and developing skills in the learners which are transferable to life, sir. It's all about life. How well the child will do in life is most important, whether it is profession or so many other things. Even professions are of so many types. You just can't say that the child is going to become a doctor or a scientist. There are multiple professions. How is or what kind of learning should be given? CBSE has recently introduced competency-based learning and assessment, which actually has worried the teachers a bit. So this question is based on that. How is competency-based learning and assessment implemented by CBSE a step in the direction of empowering learners in developing their skills? So please tell us about it.
Very, very important question. And, very recently, just about 15 days before, I posted an article of what are the 5 things the schools should teach in the context of the national education policy, immaterial of the kind of the subject discipline that you do. The first thing is self-help and self-management skill, which I think is very, very important in a world which is becoming highly divisive. Families where it's becoming divisive at this point of time, where multiplicity of skills are coming, and then your interaction with people is increasing. Self-management and self-help skills are very much necessary. And if you look at what the NEP has said for the primary classes in the curriculum, in the pedagogy, they have listed self-help skills, and that really leads to them to self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-analysis. Right? So it is not a bare skill, but that is a process of creating that self-identity, because one of the challenges in the present educational system, that if you look at, more than 80% of our students are suffering from an identity crisis. They are overestimating their identity or underestimating their identity. Either way they torture themselves and kill themselves at this point of time. So most important is the self-help skills, which is very, very important. Second, what's important is the relationship skills. It's not only that I am, but how do I relate to people? How do I do relate to my family? With technology coming around, people have been totally, iron curtain has been drawn between them. So I think the relationship skills are very, very important. That's number two that you need to have. The third is what do you call to me is a management skill, right? What's the management skill? Not that your knowledge management, your personal management, your what do you call finance management. So number of skills these are required for relationship skills that you need. The fourth skill they need is a wealth management skill, because when you talk of wealth, it's not money. Right? Health is wealth, knowledge is wealth. 101 things which make you wealthy. But today, in order to get a few marks, our pursuit for wealth is absolutely lost at this point of time.
Yeah.
So, for wealth management is going to be the fourth dimension. The fifth is going to be knowledge management, because knowledge is changing. Along with that, the change management skills, because you are not going to be the same tomorrow. So, you have to be changing. So, whatever be the subject, right? Whether it's economics or geography or statistics, or the underlying current are all these 5 skills over there. So you build in all these skills and to bring the kind of competency. The word competency is a very, very mythical term to me, I would say, because how do you define a competency? A competency, is not what I define as a board, not what I define as a teacher, but what would be relevant and contextual and utilitarian to the child at a particular point of time. If I have got 100 competencies with me, but I'm not able to use 95 of them, what is the point of acquisition of these competencies at this point of time?
Absolutely.
So, usability of competencies. So, when you talk about knowledge, competencies of cognition, skills, competencies of skills, competencies of application, competencies of research orientation, right? And competencies of, accepting the outcomes of is important. In other words, all that you can put it across under the experiential learning at this point of time. But then, when it comes to competency-based assessment, I would believe that it would be absolutely unfair to judge the competency of a child by a single individual, because that could be largely subjective. The policy also talks about a 3D assessment, if you go very carefully.
Yes.
We have self-assessment, peer assessment, and the teacher-led assessment, which I think is 3. If I had anything to say, I would have also involved the parents as stakeholders to be a part of the assessment, which would have been much more broad-based at this point of time. So I think all that put together, finally, gives you the skill, right? And, so what is the competency? Yesterday, I was listening to a story somewhere, which I think is, I would like to share that, which will tell you. Once it seems Akbar and Birbal were walking around. The Akbar asked Birbal, which is the best weapon to fight with an enemy, right? And everybody said something over there, and and Birbal said, whatever is useful to you at that time is the best weapon. And Akbar didn't agree, and they went off. A few days later, they were going to some other place, and they found an elephant, mast ho gaya, and it started running mad and was coming to attack Akbar. And Akbar didn't know what to do. Now Birbal said, "You have got so many weapons, please use them." Right? He said, "No, I can't do that. Please save me." And then what he did was, he saw a small puppy which was nearby. Birbal picked it up and threw at the elephant. The elephant saw something coming through, changed the direction, and went through. Akbar was saved. And now he said, contextuality matters, right? It is not what you are using. And therefore, to me, our objective is not to defeat a child. That's a very important thing. Our objective is to empower the child. Our objective is to enable the child with that. So any assessment of competency, any assessment of skill should be positive, constructive, building, and should give a ray of hope to the child. That's my
Absolutely. So this is the basic thing that teachers really need to always keep in their mind, that we have to empower children. So NEP also talks of empowering students through flexibility in course choices so that they are free to design their own paths of study and life. Now, there will be no hard separation among curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular, arts, humanities, science, vocational, academic streams. Subjects such as physical education, arts, vocational crafts, everything will be incorporated throughout the school curriculum. So my fear is that this reform may actually be resisted by schools for the simple reason that we have been conditioned for last 75 years to think about higher education and career choices in terms of fixed disciplines of science, commerce, and humanities. So please guide our principals and teachers why here in 21st century it's important that school education should be multidisciplinary, integrated, and holistic.
Well, first thing that I would like to say is this is absolutely nothing new, because in CBSE, I remember still from 1984 when I joined, we had this provision that a child in class 11 can take mathematics with Bharatanatyam along with horticulture along and engineering drawing. That kind of a provision did exist from 1984. We never had this kind of a science or economics and all that. But what, as you rightly said, schools did not opt for it because for the economic reasons, you need teachers and they need to be paid, and unless otherwise you get the revenue out of your children. And then that was one reason. The second was that we had fixed up, the coaching centers for having IIT and this, that, and therefore they had to be, there was a multi-crore business and they had to be taken care of, and therefore, there was a movement which was going in against that. In other words, what is important is knowledge is holistic, right? Now, I'll give an example to you. 1972, when I was a science teacher, I went to evaluate a book of, science and technology introduced by the board. And, the first chapter was energy, right? And the first paragraph talked about mechanical equivalent of heat. The second paragraph talked about photosynthesis. And the third paragraph talked about the battery, chemical battery, okay? That. Now, back, every physics teacher said, sir, first paragraph is mine. The biology said paragraph 2 is mine. And my chemistry teacher said paragraph 3 mine. But what is the topic? Energy. Now, we have conditioned knowledge, dissected knowledge that you have a right eye doctor and left eye doctor. We talk about the right brain and the left brain, though the brain works holistically at this point of time. Now, the beauty of life is seeing knowledge as a whole, right? As I gave you the example of a farmer who needs to know the kind of the soil to how he hosts the that. Similarly, when a painter, paint something, to what kind of intelligence. That's why when you talk about multiple intelligences,
absolutely,
right? All of us have got multiple intelligences, but we negate a number of intelligences. For example, in the painting, you need visual intelligence, you need spatial intelligence, you need logical intelligence, right? You need intrapersonal intelligence, you need naturalistic intelligence, so many things. Therefore, to me, I think we should, for example, when I go to an English class, right? A teacher of class 7 was teaching daffodils. Famous poem, everybody. Okay. So I very casually asked that who wrote daffodils. Nobody knew about it in the students. But then I turned to the teacher and asked her. She said, Wordsworth, sir. I said, do you know which country Wordsworth is from? He was looking here and there. Now, my one day question was, I were to teach poetry. I'm not an English teacher, but the fact that I teach poetry, when I look at daffodils, when you talk about behind the lake, beneath the trees, I would have taken my children with technology today to the lakeland and see how the hills were there, how the daffodils were dancing, creating, In other words, the beauty of the brain is to open up.
Absolutely.
We are only that. So is mathematics, right? When I introduced the concept of mathematics laboratory, people came to me and said, sir, how much money we have to invest? Every classroom is a maths lab.
Yes.
I have 100 concepts within a maths lab.
Yeah.
You understand? So the question, what I'm trying to say is, a teacher should be able to, open up the content. Today, most knowledge is getting integrated. A geography teacher may be using a mobile phone and the kind of directions to be done because children learn that way very well, right? So that is the way to create knowledge. The focus of modern times world over is that we are not in knowledge acquisition, we are not in knowledge management, right? We are not in knowledge servicing, but we are in a world of knowledge production. We are in a world of knowledge synthesis. Therefore, creation of new knowledge is important. And which class? LKG, right? Don't say 7th class is important, because every child from this class, what is the problem here? The teacher gives a question and asks the children to answer, and she says, this is not the answer I want. The question is, we are in a world of right answer syndrome. I think it's time we should move. Creativity and things will come. Only we people to think differently, right? They may do a mistake. I would appreciate they're doing a mistake, but telling me why they do that.
Absolutely, sir.
So I think that has to be, therefore, I'm extremely happy, right? Just to give you an example, can you have mathematics and music put together?
Why not? Why not?
Dance put together? I went to your school as a chief guest, and you won't believe after the program was over, my math teacher came running to me as I was leaving. Sir, please 15 minutes, sir. You will have. I brought my math lab on the stage. I found class 3 to 5 children came and give a dance performance. We're using ribbons, and the topic was the properties of lines. 6th to 8th class children came and gave a break dance. The topic was the congruence of triangles through break dance. 11th class children came and gave a Bharatanatyam, and the concept was Boolean algebra, Boolean addition subtraction.
Oh, wow.
I understand.
Yeah.
My question is, right? Huge scope for music and mathematics, language and mathematics, dance and mathematics, every subject. And that's why I believe that. And second is art integration. Unfortunately, we think that art is only painting and drawing. No. Art is aesthetics, appreciation. Art is a perception of looking at things with a different mind. And therefore, there is art in music, in mathematics, art in geography, art in chemistry. And that's why we should take it. And therefore, I'm really happy that this has happened.
Thank you so much, sir. Life is multidisciplinary, so our classrooms also have to be multidisciplinary now. And before that, our teachers have to get into this mindset. Yeah. Sir, let me now come to language learning. I mean, since although you're a person from chemistry, but such a love for language and such a command over language, a poet at heart. So NEP 2020 has introduced a number of innovations in language learning when it talks about education in mother tongue, education in home language, multilingualism, and learning of classical Indian languages like Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia, even Pali, Persian, and Prakrit it talks about. So why is language learning so important for our little children? Kindly guide the schools so that they take this initiative seriously.
Yes, to me, language is the vehicle of culture, right? It's not the culture that we exhibit outside, but it is the vehicle of thought culture. And therefore, the way a society, a community deals with the language is a reflection of that society. In those days, the word that we used in science, in Hindi and Sanskrit for that was Sahitya, right? And they defined literature as Sahitasya Bhavaha Sahityam. Etakari Bhavanavon ka Sankalan Sahitya hai. All that what we get in a magazine today is not literature. They are pieces of information, right? Sahitasya Bhavaha Sahityam, which can really create that. So language has a power of culturing the mind. It is a direct contact with the emotional content of the people, right? It softens the emotional skills of the people, right? it creates better regulatory mechanisms of relationships at this point of time, right? And in professional terms also, it's a very good communicating dimension. Now, looking back in the history of India, you see immediate of languages at this point of time, whether it's Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Assamese, you take, you know, that is a treasure house of the experiences, emotions, the ways of life of the people, right? Therefore, every language has got to be celebrated. And as one who has worked with the previous policies together, I'm extremely happy about this particular policy. With slight modification of the three language formula, you have opened up all the languages, and therefore not only patronizing the mother tongue, but also patronizing all the Indian languages is very, very important. And I think this will improve the quality of life of people.
Absolutely.
Okay, and at that too at these formative years, right? And when it comes to the linguistic integration of people, sometimes people ask me, right, sir, what is your mother tongue? I said Tamil. So how do you speak the so much of Hindi? Where did you study? I said I want to share with you a very interesting incident. I started learning Hindi when I was in class 5, right? And I remember that my father was a Hindi teacher, but that was out of contact. And you know what happened? He used to teach people classes in the morning. And my job as a student of class 4, 5 was to take a cup of coffee for him. Now, I never had a flask of those days. We used to carry it in a stainless steel container. One day I went to, and with the coffee, he was teaching the Bal Leela of Surdas, a song. Maya mohidao bahut ki jayo moso kahata molukoli no jasmati ka bujayo chota ki dai dai hansa da gwala bala sab. It goes in my memory. I was sitting ranting, and after half an hour he asked me, where is coffee? By that time the coffee has become cold. I said, why? I said I was listening so much to what you were. He said, you want to learn Hindi? That's how I started. And before I finished my BSc, I passed my Sahitya. So passion. But you wouldn't believe today what I am today is not because of my chemistry. It's because I read not only Ramdari Sindhanakar and Joshua, I read Francis Bacon, Milton, Shakespeare, I read Tamil. So literature has no barrier of languages. And that's how we need to, children are capable of learning languages. I'm happy it's done. I only wish my chemistry teachers, physics teachers take time to go and appear for an MA English or some other language and then qualify, and they will know, they will come back to the principal and say, I want now to go here. That's what's going on.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm actually simultaneously taking up questions which have come through the participants also. So there are 2 questions related to language learning. One is that विद्यार्थियों में हिंदी विषय के प्रति लेखन की भावना कैसे जागृत करें? And second is how students can be motivated to enhance their reading habits.
Well, one very interesting complaint I must say, normally the human mind has got, a tendency to be, to remain in the comfort zone. Okay. So when they are slightly familiar with something, they said, "Mujhe to pata hai." And very often when I used to be the director and controller of exam, I used to find that in class 10 Hindi or 12th English Hindi core, students from Kerala or students from Karnataka used to get first rank, and people from UP and Delhi, ye kaise ho sakta hai? Kerala. I said they are writing Sahityik Hindi, right? In other words, what happens with the UP and Delhi is, bolchal ki Hindi jo seekhte hain, the people immediately think that that's good enough for them to communicate. That we need to understand that there is a difference, right? And that's why I think the language teaching, though I have been a pattern of communicative approach to language teaching, I also believe that we have done some amount of injustice to the kind of literature and the kind of things over there. And writing is an expression of the self. So to me, right? Yeah, I'll give an example because she's talking about Hindi. I went to a school in a place called Parvanu about 20 years back, and it was a Hindi class, right? And the Hindi teacher told me, sir, हमने बच्चों को एक कविता लिखने के लिए कविता स्पर्श रखा था, and they have written poems, and we have displayed all the poems over there, right? जैसे मैं देख के आ रहा था, I saw a poem on Kargil. That was immediately after the Kargil war. So I was thinking about I saw the poem. I was so impressed. It was class 6. I asked the girl, I asked the person who wrote it. A 6th class girl wrote the poem. I said, बहुत खूब लिखा है, you have done extremely well, अच्छा लिखा है, तो आपने कारगिल के बारे में लिखा है, तो अगर आपको कारगिल जाने का मौका मिलेगा तो आप क्या करेंगी? आप जाएंगी क्या? इसे तो आंसर जरूर जाओगी. तो मैंने कहा, हाँ, कारगिल में जाके आप क्या करोगी? I was a little, मैं सबको पानी पिलाऊंगी सर. Shaken. I was shaken. You understand that writing is not the words.
Yeah.
It is the emotion behind it.
It's the emotions. Absolutely.
It is that. So you have to develop it right from class 5. Right.
So, yeah.
One point on reading habits. Right. Reading habits, they are almost dying. Right. And that too with your Kindles and other things coming through. When I was a student, an English lesson went to 4 pages. Afterwards, teachers said not more than 2 pages. Now, even with 1 page, teachers are grumbling, right? Bacha kaise padega? I think we have to rehabilitate. You must have a digital library. I would prefer that. Children love technology. Therefore, in our days, we used to have classroom libraries. Now, you create for every class 10 books which they should read through the year and put it as a digital book because you get them free of cost, and tell them that each of them should read and comprehend, and then keep some competition in others. You have to do it because, that's the future.
Absolutely, sir. So going back to the point that you just now made, I feel that effective domain has to be brought into the classroom. Teachers are focusing too much on cognition. They're all the time talking about principles, theory, rules, and regulations, but they are not personalizing the knowledge. They are not connecting it to the learner. So that emotional connect is missing. I think that really needs to be, and language and literature are very, very, helpful in doing that. So now I'm coming to a point which is extremely important in the implementation of NEP, that is reforms in teacher education to improve the quality of teaching and learning in our schools. So the kind of in-service training that we have, it sometimes makes me feel that our teacher training workshops are as much in need of reforms as our classrooms. Most of the trainings are lecture mode, one-way traffic, where teacher hardly gets in an opportunity to even share their doubts and queries. As a result, nothing is transferred to the classroom situation. And even though the teacher may, take up maybe 5, 10, 20 training workshops in a year, but there is no change in the classroom. So please share with our friends what kind of teacher training gets transferred to the classroom. And what is the role of teacher observation and feedback in bringing qualitative improvement in teacher performance? Teachers cannot leave the teacher like that. We have to observe. We have to keep on giving feedback.
See, if you have gone through the draft policy of this national education policy, especially on teacher education,
yes,
you will understand that they have almost beaten it to death. Right? The thing is, nearly 85% of the institutions in this country in teacher education are absolutely fake. Yeah. They don't deliver. And very often, even the people who don't attend even the colleges, they get a degree on a payment or something. I mean, I don't say that. It's what the policy talks about. The draft policy talks about. So the teacher education in this country is in a very, very, very bad shape, right? So the question basically is, I don't foresee an early time where we can rehabilitate teacher education, right? You can talk any amount of policy and all that over there. All that has to be happening is, when I was talking to an industry person, they said less than 7% of your engineers coming out of colleges are competent to do a job. But still we recruit them. Why? We make them go through the process for 6 months, and then we have, contextualize them to our situation. That's exactly what's going to happen in schools. You know, pre-entry teacher training is very, very important for schools concerned. Forget about their B.Ed, forget about their M.Ed, whether it's true, it's bogus, this, that, what they have learned. Number one. And there is a total mismatch between the kind of the curriculum that you have for teacher education and the kind of needs that you have in the classroom education, right? You will be shocked to see that when I had an interaction with a principal of a teacher's college, then I asked a very interesting, pertinent question to him. I asked him, sir, do you think Bloom's taxonomy is still relevant in the multi-dimensional learning and multi-faceted learning? He said, what is that? I said, what do you mean? Right? Now imagine a person who doesn't understand what is Bloom's taxonomy. How is he going to lead? You know, so remember, teachers should remember one thing, institutional responsibility for training the teachers, number one, which I think we need to focus. Second, self-learning is all that the teachers need. I have learned so much after my retirement. I don't go to a training workshop. I don't ask anybody to me. If I sit before my computer, type the word multiple intelligences, I have 13 lakh websites available. If I say emotional intelligence, I got 7 lakh websites available, right? Now, before coming to this program, you asked me about competency-based testing. I went through and I might have spent about at least 1 hour. What are the various, whether you asked me whether I tell, that's not the thing. I said, listen, I'm going to a class. I'm going to talk to them. So the question is, a teacher needs to be passionate. Okay, that passion cannot be trained. And defining passion, somebody said, when you set yourself on fire, people love to come and see how you burn. So when a passionate teacher teaches in the class, others come and see, ye kaise padhate. As a student of chemistry, I used to cut my inorganic chemistry classes, go and stand outside an English class by one of my professors who used to teach Shakespeare. I can't go inside. I used to say, teach how this guy teaches Shakespeare. I have nothing to do with it. But the question is, he was passionate. I was admired. So to me, whether you are teaching LKG, whether you are teaching 9, that you have to be passionate. Second point, which I would like to say, I remember an anecdote when I was a teacher in 9th class. One of the students had not done well. So my principal called me, a fantastic gentleman. He called me and he wanted to debate in the presence of the parent. So he said, Mr. Bala, can you explain why this boy is not doing well? I very casually told him, sir, what can I do? I can take a horse to the pond, but I cannot make it drink. And he smiled and said, my dear Bala, your job is not to take the horse to the pond to drink the water, but your job is to create a thirst in the horse so that it automatically goes to drink the water.
How beautiful is that?
That, to me, is a teacher.
Yes.
How do you create that passion, right? And it's not 10 points that you say, but it is the 3 points that you do. And another thing is, remember, teach with your heart, not with your mind, right? One more anecdote I will say, just few months before, a very interesting thing happened. 5 of my students had come when I was a principal. 25 years later, they wanted to have a, alumni get together. So they came home, I had a cup of coffee, I was talking to them. One guy who was a vice president of a bank said, sir, you are a great chemistry teacher. I felt very happy, wanted to pat my back. But there was another girl who was there sitting by my side. She told me, but one thing, sir, you taught us everything except chemistry. Because the moment I go to the class, my student used to say, Master has come, please close your books. Not opening. First few minutes, quiz, song, dance, this, that. You create that vibrance. And I tell only 5 points, the remaining 5 points they learn. My job as a teacher, as a pedagogue, is to enable learning.
And ignite the passion in them. Yes, sir. Sir, I have got 2 very important questions left, so I'll seek your permission to go ahead, even though the time is, So in the scheme of things, the most important human factor on whom the implementation and subsequent success of reforms are hinged is the school principals. They need to have a vision, they need to have a plan of action to be able to implement reforms and bring a turnaround in the classrooms and the entire school. So please share some strategies and sound tips with our principals to manage this change confidently and successfully.
Yeah. See, today we talk about pedagogical leadership, right?
Yes.
Pedagogical leadership, when we talk about, as a matter of fact, to be right from LKG teacher to the chairman of a board, everybody is a pedagogical leader in their own context. Pedagogical leadership doesn't come with a post. That's a positional leadership. Okay. So let's try to understand that there is a difference between, given a position, you only coordinate, you facilitate, you motivate, you, what do you call, you act as the torch bearer.
Yes.
Okay. So, but nevertheless, when it comes to a principle, I go back to what I said 15 years before, which I hold till now. I would like to redesignate a principal as a chief learning officer. Okay. So the question basically is, they have to be continuously learning. If I'm going to tell my children, right, not teachers, that you have to do this, do I know it? Right? When from a chemistry teacher, I became a principal, I was walking around and I found my business studies commerce teacher was not there in the class. I walked into the class. I said, what was the, what is the period? Chemistry, commerce, sir. What topic are you to do? Sir, we have to do insurance. Honestly, I have nothing to do with this one. I said, okay, how many of you have got scooters? Yes, sir. How many of you insured your scooters? Sir. What's the kind of insurance? First party, second party, third party? The third party. Tell me what is the difference between first party, third party? Why should we have a third party insurance? Generated a question. Yeah. I had to break open from my chemistry.
Yeah.
So as you grow up as a principal, you are a knowledge manager, you are a knowledge architect, right? And you are a HR manager, human relationship. To me, that I always tell my principals, don't be a boss. But the term boss is used only in the films as a way, right? So you have to be a glorified teacher, right? You have to be a better teacher, right? Yeah. So unfortunately today what has happened with your governments, state governments and CBSE and others coming, and your transport rule, this, that, principals have become glorified clerks. I'm sorry to say that, but that's, they have absolutely no option for that. I think that's where the kind of managerial system in schools are to slightly, fraction the work and leave the kind of academic dimension to the principals of schools to look after. Yes, principal to me is a manager of the future. Yeah. He's not the manager of the present only, he's a manager of the future. Absolutely. So he has got to be thinking about, what next is important. And more than that, she's an excellent PRO.
Yes.
Because today, managing parents is a very, very difficult thing. You may have 1,000 parents with you, but one parent is sufficient to take your life out. Right? And therefore, I'm talking about experiences in other.
Yes,
principals who came and put their, in schools where I was an advisor, they came and put their papers and said, sorry, sir, I don't want to. Why? This parent is harassing me. So, both hota hai. So, they need a lot of the moral courage and that. I believe that there was a time when I recommended principals to go for an IAM training, right? I think most of you had been there, a part of it. Those days are gone now, right? Yes. Now, in other words, you have to be a self-learner as your teacher is, right? You have to be a self-learner. And I believe that you should be a person who is self-actualized. Don't expect anybody to come and pat your back. You pat your back because you have done the job. You are the catalyst. That's what a principal is.
Yeah. So the entire role of principal, the mindset of principal needs to actually undergo a change. And I really loved the designation that you have said, Chief Learning Officer. And I think the schools should be called learning organizations
Absolutely.
rather than the schools. Yeah. Sir, I'll be coming to the last and a very, very important, topic. NEP talks about efficient resources and effective governance through establishment of school complexes. CBSE implemented this idea, and they, came out with the idea of hubs of learning. However, sir, the ground reality is that very few schools are willing to collaborate, share anything. And in this 21st century, which is a time about communication, collaboration, networking, the schools are actually most isolated units. And my fear is that they may become obsolete. They may actually be of no use to the learner if they continue like this.
Just give a second. I just switch on.
Yeah.
Sorry. Unfortunately, the power was giving a problem.
Yes.
You see, when it comes to the hubs of learning, I think they are only a new generation baby of your Sahodaya complexes which you had at some point of time. But in the government context, it has got a great relevance, right? It will be difficult in the private schools. Any kind of association between a private school and a government schools cannot be forced from the top, right? If it is done, it will be having only short-term life, not a long-term life, right? It will be more to fill in the records rather than, more movement by the heart. But between private schools, between government schools, that they can do. But in the context of government schools coming together, there are lots of problems over there, mobility of principals, financial problem, this, that, ego problem. But even in our Sahodayas, even in our private schools, I find this particular problem. I am a senior principal, you are a junior principal. I am a former chairman of the Sahodaya, you are a new chairman. All these kinds of, you see, systems are not killed because of their inefficiencies. Systems are killed consciously, just like a democracy is killed consciously by people and not the process. So my only feeling is that these are all a good way for a government to optimize the resources. For example, what is that could happen? A couple of government schools are, what they taught, a high school, some middle schools, some primary schools can have a common music teacher, common physical education teacher, because there may not be more periods on that. So in terms of optimization of resources, in terms of universalization of knowledge, I think they are very good. But then you see, I anticipate only 30% efficiency in such systems.
Absolutely, sir. So lastly, the lastest of all my questions is, sports are extremely important, but sir, sports actually, are the first casualty of learning. So anybody wants to take an extra class, chalo PT ka period de do. So why or how can we convince people how important sports are for learning? For the brain to function better, for the heart, for the health to be good. So please do say something about it.
The problem lies, just like, vocational education, the nomenclature killed it, right? Not the content. Similarly, I think the word sports has probably been misinterpreted as, some games to be played. What we need is, when we introduce a concept of health education, people did not think it was a good role of the school. But given this COVID and other things happening around, I think we need to go more into reinforcing, right, preventive health and growth. The period has to be preventive health and growth. And when you put these positive terms over there, people will be there. To me, very, very important, because I don't know how many of you would have read a beautiful book called Brain Rules by John Medina, right? I have nearly about 30, 40 books on how the brain works, and almost every book says, the first chapter is exercise, right? The the health of the mind depends upon the health of the body, because the learning is all about neural network. The learning is all about a healthy mind, and therefore, four factors in terms of health: the food that you take, right? The what do you call, diversification of actions that you do, right? And the exercises that you do, and the sleep that you have. All are four dimensions of health. So I would prefer in pre-KG class, if children have one period of sleep, please do that, because they cannot have more than 1.5 hours of continuous learning, right? So I think, when we talked about life skills, we have not addressed to the core essentials of life skills. So time has come, we need to refocus sports education as preventive health and growth, right? And I bet if you say that, parents will immediately come to that. So we need to reposition the subject in a positive climate. That's my idea.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Ma'am Suman, would you like to say a word before I hand over to Manju for vote of thanks? I think there is a connectivity problem.
Myself. Balaji, actually you leave everybody speechless, but there's always a question that has bothered me. I don't want to take more time. It's just a concern. And that is when we are talking so much of curriculum and you look at the inadequacies outside in terms of gender insensitivity, the violence, the aggression, and the fact that pluralistic culture is such a traditional, rich part of it. It seems to be fragmenting away, and we've never addressed these issues in the curriculum. It just remains a concern of mine. If you would like to address it, it'll be nice. But this is a continuous concern. We talk about gender, but look what's happening to women. I mean, day by day, things are not improving, yet we must glorify and be nationalistic about it, in the classrooms. It's my genuine.
Yeah. You are absolutely right, Suman. The point basically is, what I'm not looking at some of the very specific issues, but if you look at the whole dynamics of human evolution, both in India and outside, one thing which is emerging is we are increasingly becoming an intolerant society, right? So basically in our human development, there is a sense of lack of tolerance, lack of patience, and one-upmanship, and then coming out of that is an aggression and subsequently violence. All these are manifesting in one form or the other. One of the dimensions is the gender part of it, one dimension of that. And if you look at the whole thing, all these things are interrelated, right? The reason being, for example, the mental culture that we develop, right, is being challenged. For example, when I was a student, when I asked my father I wanted a new pair of chappals, he used to say, "Abhi paisa nahi hai, next week." मैंने कहा ठीक है. Next week I go, बेटा और एक हफ्ता रुक लो, उसके बाद दे देता हूँ, ठीक है. But now, when I go to a child and the child asks for a mobile phone, मैं कल दिलाऊंगा, they will say, नहीं अभी. The question is, what has happened with technology intervention? I think I go back to Einstein, who said that with the world of technology may create a set of idiots. That's what Einstein said, right? And what has happened is that, we provide an input to a computer or to a mobile. And there was a time when I started a computer in 1978, to boot the computer, it would take 10 minutes. I used to be very patiently waiting for 10 minutes for the computer to boot. Today, I don't wait for 10 seconds. If it doesn't, I just throw it off. And the guys go, throw it go, right? My mental culture, my mental violence is that. Therefore, what has happened is the input-output process time of the human brain is absolutely, decreasing. Therefore, in every aspect of life, whether it's personal, professional, and just to give an example, somebody was discussing with me yesterday, in 70s, the number of court cases of divorce in Tamil Nadu used to be 2 per year or 3 per year. Now, it is hundreds per day. The question is, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, across the country, I'm just giving an example. Uh, the the uh, mm, uh, I think we need to revisit our approach to education, right? And I think that way, this particular policy might help if we can diffuse a competitive society to a collaborative society. I think our examinations have done more harm in what do you call by making a fake intelligent set of people rather than human people. I think the objective has to be promote human excellence, right? I think undercurrent of all process of education, be it India or elsewhere, has to be human excellence, and that alone can solve all the problems that you have been talking about.
So thank you so much. Actually, when you were talking about this, it took me back to, you know, that experiment Project Marshmallow, and they talked about delayed gratification and
Yeah.
training children to wait for their turn. Yes, sir. So thank you so much. And now formally from Bluebell School, Mrs. Manju Sethi, the principal of the school, is going to deliver the vote of
Thank
thanks.
you. Enjoyed being you.
Thank you, Rashmi. Uh, a school's culture is the daily manifestation of its purpose and core beliefs. Adopting competency-based learning means more than a shift in pedagogy. It means committing to a mindset and a system that prioritize learning over time, skills over content, and relevant holistic assessment over high-stakes testing. Getting the culture right ensures the success of the structural and pedagogical changes needed to make the schools competency-based. To succeed, competency-based learning must infuse the relationships, structures, and rituals that define our communities. Schools must prepare their students for the fast evolving future, where critical thinking and decision making shall be the key skills required by them to design their careers. And for this, experiences have to be provided in the curriculum transaction and pedagogy adopted by the schools. Dr. Balasubramanian has so clearly explained the urgency to introduce vocational education to address the needs of the country. NEP 2020 policy is following the learning curve of the children. It is important to go beyond the normal process of pedagogy and provide the brain with experiences that it can process. The teacher has now become the co-constructor of knowledge through a variety of learning experiences, moving away from rote learning to experiential learning. Rightly said, sir, the four walls of the classroom have opened up. The teachers have to build up their own competencies to meet the requirements of the learners using a variety of assessment tools. Knowledge has to be taken as a whole, and this can be addressed by following
I think there is a problem in the connection. So again, on behalf of everybody, I would like to thank you for coming here to be with us and to enlighten us. Thank you so much, sir.
The pleasure always, Suman, Rashmi, and the teachers, right? Get back to you soon. The COVID scenario is okay.
Yes, sir. We are really looking forward to meeting you again. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks, sir.
So just to tell you that for your next seminar, you're not going to go off easily from Bluebells. And for your next seminar, we'd love something like what you've done, deep amount of research, I know, is that how the brain works. I think that will be great. We need to revisit it from the very beginning, the entire evolution of how we learn.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Inspire us to be.
If any of you would like to know, you can go visit my website called balaspeaks.in, where I have put a book called Schooling the Kid, right? It's a free download. They can take it. That talks about prenatal learning to adolescent learning complete. They can have a preliminary before we present. There's a book called Schooling
We'll
the
do that.
website.
Lovely.
We'll do that, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.